Hey, everybody.
Hi, Facebook.
It may seem like deja vu.
Happy Friday.
It is now Friday, though
For us.
In truth, it's a few minutes after we were with you yesterday.
True. We are pre-recording Friday. Sometimes we need to open up the Friday schedule, and this Friday is one of those instances. And we are able to be with you, just not live. So we apologize for that, but glad that you are with us. Glad that you joined today as we finish up the week together.
Yeah, it has been a pretty sort of calm and slow, well, maybe not slow is not the right word, but it's been a relatively methodical week around here. And so hopefully we will see everybody for worship on Sunday as we continue on this Advent journey. Not the same as it normally is, but I think there's really not a year that's more important to take the full journey of Advent than this year. So hope to see you for worship at 8:50.
Yeah, it's interesting. So far, it feels like Advent is easier in some ways, the expectation of Christmas, but not quite as able to rush forward into it like we normally do. And so our situation is kind of forcing us to have more of an Advent than maybe has come easily before. So, and I hope that's a good thing. There's hardness, difficulty in it, but
yeah, the gospel's always open for us to receive it in new times and places, but the problem, as it always has been, is getting out of our way so that we can experience it in the spirit of the one who's gave his life for us, which is, in some ways fitting as we come to the end of Mark here to sort of be walking through what we don't think of as Advent themes, but is certainly retracing the ground of the very gifts that Jesus Christ came to give. So,
yeah, a little fewer distractions might help us to be more focused, more aware at times. So.
Well, that said, we are in Mark chapter 14 again, starting at verse 66 today.
Finishing up the 14th chapter, moving into the 15th chapter. I think, a familiar story. Again, if you've lived through the Easter narrative a few times, this is not something new. Mark's version of it is not particularly different than other versions of it, but we will start here in verse 66. While Peter was below in the courtyard, one of the servant girls of the high priest came by. She saw Peter warming himself. She stared at him, and she said, "You were also with Jesus, the man from Nazareth." He denied it and said, "I don't know or understand what you're talking about." And he went out into the forecourt. Then the cock crowed. And the servant girl, on seeing him, began again to say to the bystanders, "This man is one of them." But again he denied it. And after a little while, the bystanders again said to Peter, "Certainly you are one of them, for you're a Galilean." But he began to curse, and he swore an oath, "I do not know the man you're talking about." At that moment, the cock crowed for the second time, Then Peter remembered that Jesus had said to him, "Before the cock crows twice, you will deny me 3 times." And he broke down and wept. The Apostle Peter is an interesting character story. Arguably, we know more about him in the context of the story than any other disciple. We're going to learn a lot about Paul in the rest of the New Testament. We know a fair amount of John, but I don't think there's any comparison for the amount of time front and center that Peter gets. And for Peter, this is that pivotal moment. This is when all of the saying things, when all of the bravado, when all of the bragging, when all of the affirmation of Jesus kind of falls by the wayside. And he has this terribly painful moment of self-realization. And as he discovers what he's done, as he remembers Jesus' words, and remember here is not just, oh yeah, Jesus said that. It crushes him. It hurts him that he now understands that he has lived out what just a day ago was the unimaginable prediction that Jesus had given him.
Yeah, I think the temptation in a text like this is to not just put ourselves in Peter's shoes, but to actually do quite a bit of psychoanalyzing of what Peter's thinking and feeling. And, interestingly, the gospel writer, Mark, doesn't really spend a lot of time fleshing out all of those feelings. We just have that simple language, what Peter remembered, and he broke down and wept. And I think one of the things that makes this story so compelling is the fact that Peter's inclusion in the gospel almost certainly has some bearing on the fact that he served as the first significant leader in the Christian church. In fact, the Apostle Paul in his writings makes it clear that even when making decisions within his own leadership context and congregations that he served, he felt beholden to Peter's leadership. And Peter was close to the center, if not in the center, of Jesus's life and ministry, and certainly his discipleship circle. And when it comes time to stand by Jesus, when all of the bluster has been said, when all of the promises have been made, not even Peter is faithful to Jesus Christ. And so, we expect in the previous story, when the high priests and the scribes and the people from the temple, when they accuse Jesus, when they go against Jesus, we expect that Jesus has been in opposition with them. But if this is your first time reading the gospel, you might have still had some hope that Jesus had some people to stand by him. And that is not true. Peter here makes it clear that he is unwilling in this moment to be able to name the truth of who he is. And I do think that if you consider once again the context of who this letter may have been delivered to, I think there is some really very challenging good news in that you will have moments of testing, and it's okay to consider that there may even be moments and people and times who don't pass the test in moments of adversity. Not even Peter did. And the gift that Jesus gives is even for Peter. And I think someone like the gospel writer of John actually has this scene where Peter sort of comes around at the end of the story. And I almost think that that's a kind of movement, though not in this particular gospel telling. I think we kind of get a sense for indirectly that what is happening to Peter is more than just Peter in particular. It has in mind more people and a larger church.
Yeah, Peter gets humbled here, and because he does, and because Mark gives us some interesting details, like Peter cursed the crowd and he swears an oath, it is easy to focus on Peter. And it's not that Peter isn't an important part of this story, but again, if we move out a little bit to look at a bigger picture, we understand that at the very moment Jesus is committing himself to what lay ahead, Peter is backing off. There is this contrast between the characters of the story, all the rest of them, and Jesus. And what we see in that, I think, from a big picture theological perspective is a sort of humbling reminder that we are all human, but B, the idea that Peter, though a man heretofore of some faith, can't make the journey to the cross. The other disciples can't face the cross. They've turned, they've run. It is Jesus alone who sets himself toward the events that are unfolding. And Peter, in the realization of that, as Peter comes to terms with his own cowardice, his own failure, it breaks him. And probably in the big picture, this is a pivotal moment for Peter, because those who struggle with confidence and arrogance have a moment. If they're going to get past that, there generally has to be a moment where they're brought low, and this is it. And in the big picture, we might even say that, looking back, this could be what inspires a greatness in Peter down the road. That would be for speculation, but we know that this isn't the end of the story for Peter, but it certainly is a low point.
Yeah, and in some ways, I think it does unravel the image of the kingdom that Peter had. We see within the gospel these moments where it appears that Peter does think that the way forward is to kick out the Romans. He doesn't seem to be a zealot per se, but he does seem to think that, Jesus should have some authority, some even military strength. And so the guy who just a few verses ago was telling Jesus, "No, I'll take up arms. I'm gonna defend you." Even Peter's vision of the kingdom is unraveling here. Jesus's vision of the kingdom he's been proclaiming, by the way, since first verses of this gospel, is the same kingdom that now continues. Jesus is validated. Ironically, that's the thing that the gospels do that really they really unravel our expectations, is because you don't think of the person in authority as the one who's being beaten, the one who's being accused, the one who's going through the system and having the system turn against them. And yet Jesus is right about the kind of kingdom that he's initiating. And it is, unfortunately, a kingdom that looks like him setting his face to the cross, to his own death. And, Peter, in this moment of his own unraveling, I think is in some ways pointing us to the fact that Jesus isn't unraveling. The kingdom that he's proclaimed continues to be even more and more present and evident. But that's a humbling struggle, I think, when you consider how that must have hit Peter like a ton of bricks when he realized what Jesus had been saying all along.
Yeah, I don't want to chase this very far, but there is a contrast in the book of Acts. We get told a story. Well, really, it's in two places. I think we find it in one of the Gospels and also the book of Acts. We get a follow-up story on Judas, who, in coming to terms with what he has done, commits suicide. But here we have Peter as his story unfolds and he comes to terms with what he has done. It reinstates his faith. It now frees him to follow Jesus with a level of humility. He's no longer brash and bragging, and he doesn't have the kind of authoritarian swagger that he has pre this moment. This is a pivotal moment for Peter, and I think for any of us that follow Jesus. There is a sense in which faith is an invitation to arrogance in the wrong way if we allow it to lead us the wrong direction. And Peter is a good example of where that ultimately takes us. The story continues. We have the next morning as we move into chapter 15. As soon as it was morning, the chief priests held a consultation with the elders and scribes and the council. They bound Jesus, they led him away and handed him over to Pilate. Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" He said, "You say so." Then the chief priests accused him of many things. Pilate asked him again, "Have you no answer? See how many charges they bring against you." But Jesus made no further reply. Pilate was amazed. So a little politics here. The Jews can't do what they want to Jesus without Roman permission. The Romans have to be involved. If they're going to try and get Jesus crucified, they need to co-opt Pilate and Roman authority into their scheme. If they do this by themselves, they run the risk of being punished or penalized. And so they take Jesus over. And notice the language here, King of the Jews. The Romans could probably not care a great deal about Jewish religious squabbles as long as they didn't cause unrest. When they began to disturb the peace, the Romans would get concerned. And when they involved a word like king, the Romans would also perk their ears up fairly quickly. And so this is a very specific charge laid against Jesus, and for very good reason from their perspective, that in saying this man claims to be king of the Jews, what they are insinuating is that Jesus wants to be the leader of the Jewish people and perhaps and very likely lead them against Rome in battle. And so this is no accident, the way that this gets worded here. And then we encounter Pilate, and here in this gospel, Pilate doesn't play the role that he does. You know, there are other stories about Pilate. In this story, Pilate is kind of caught in the middle between Roman authority, Jewish peace, and what we get told is that he's amazed. He wants a response from Jesus. He asks for an answer, but Jesus won't reply. And we've already covered, I think, at length the strength of Jesus and where that comes from. But it amazes Pilate, and maybe, given the passage we'll look at Monday, even troubles him to some extent.
Yeah, I think it's worth noting here that the trial of Jesus has now changed 180 degrees. The stuff that we saw yesterday when we were talking about what Jesus was accused of, the idea of the temple being torn down, asked, "Are you the Messiah?" These do have political, military connotations. There are groups in Israel who think of this in the same way as restoring the lineage, the line of King David, that the next king of Israel will put down Roman authority. But there's a sense in which when Jesus shows up to Pilate, the thing that he's accused of is very specifically geared for a thing that Pilate will listen to. It's not as if the stuff that was behind closed doors the night before is now the stuff that they brought. No, they've shifted the story so that there's some play, that there's a chance that they win. And, of course, that's expertly done. But what's interesting in that, and the gospel's way of subverting it, is the fact that, ironically, in doing this, the chief priests and the scribes are putting themselves on the wrong side of history as the right side of history literally stands in front of them. In other words, they're saying that, hey, here's the guy who wants to be king of the Jews. He's the one who wants to overthrow Roman oppression, when in fact, Jesus is the Messiah. Gospel Mark wants us to know that. But also, he said all along in his teaching that he didn't come to abolish the kingdoms of the world, but to inaugurate a new kingdom. That's literally what he's doing right now underneath all of their noses. The thing that he said was going to happen is now being lived out. And the reason I wanted to point this out is, you might have noticed yesterday, we just came off some chapters where Jesus was talking a lot. I mean, lots of red verses, lots of teaching, lots of proclamations against religious leaders. Isn't it interesting that yesterday in his time with the religious leaders and today in his trial with Pilate, Jesus is nearly silent? And I think there could be lots of reasons for that, but it strikes me that Jesus has nothing more that needs said. He's said everything that there is to say, and now literally history is just playing out, not in some sort of, like prophecy in a sort of like a magic trick that Jesus called it all ahead of time. But because Jesus is who he is, now as this story is going to move forward, it will unfold as he knew it would and had said it would. And ironically, each one of these characters' moves has already been something that Jesus saw coming. And so while he is the defendant in this case, he stands as the one who needs to make no case in his defense because he's already made it elsewhere.
Yeah, and again, we will see this maybe more clearly in the other Gospels, but whenever a Gospel writer is showing you Jesus in comparison with someone who looks like they have power, they're doing so in order to help us understand that the real power is in the Messiah. And, the Jews are working the system here. They accused Jesus of heresy or blasphemy. Pilate doesn't care about that, so when they bring him, they accuse him of insurrection or sedition, a crime against Rome, not against Israel, because Rome doesn't really care about that. We'll talk Monday about Pilate. Pilate's an interesting character, and the way that he's portrayed in this gospel story is interesting as well, and we'll cover that on Monday. But for today, we hope there's been something in this that has been helpful, maybe some piece of information that is thought-provoking or something that you hadn't seen before. If you have any questions or comments, as always, let us know.
And we will see you again next Monday.
Have a great weekend.
Thank you for joining us for this daily Bible study. If this is your first time, welcome. We are so glad that you have joined us for this time of intentional study of God's Word. You will find in the description of this video a link to our website. We would love to get to know who you are. We'd love to reach out and greet you personally, but be sure, whether or not this is your first time, to like this video. If you're on Facebook, share it so that other people might be able to find it too. If you're on YouTube, consider subscribing. You'll receive more content like this every day at 2 o'clock Central Standard Time. On top of that, every Wednesday at 9 o'clock, we release a Pastor Talk podcast, which goes through different series, but all of them about faith and life and discipleship of Jesus Christ. Friends, regardless of how many times you've been with us, we hope that this day has been meaningful for you as you seek to follow Jesus Christ. So until next time, be blessed. We look forward to seeing you soon.